I always think of like agility being so important in revenue management. And I might argue, like coming from a beach destination, moving to a ski market, you have to be even more agile just because the weather changes so frequently. So we try to do a lot of proactive owner and guest communication and education ahead of time, and then have marketing plans built out. So if you're going through a dry spell, which we are right now in Jackson, it's snowing in Destin, Florida, but it hasn't snowed here in 2 weeks. We have these marketing plans built out to showcase other things to do in Jackson. And then we also, in the meantime, will communicate with owners proactively and say, hey, just want you to know it's about to not snow for the next 3 weeks. So we are going to be more competitive when it comes to pricing.
Now, when it comes to reacting to snow events and stuff like that, I prepare for it as far out in advance as possible. So if I can get a decent foundation of occupancy on the books, like way far out in advance, then there's like less margin for error as I'm adjusting at the last minute. And so that starts with like opening dates as far as you can and counting on capturing the data that's not coming in for or the demand that's not coming in for the snow.
Welcome to RevLabs by PriceLabs.
So let's take just a moment. You can see that I've got some friends over here with me. Take a second to introduce myself. My name's Kyle Driskell. I'm a former revenue manager for a large property management company in Tennessee, or I'm sorry, in the US. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, but I priced in a lot of different mountain areas. Very familiar with Colorado mountain area, Smoky Mountain area, which isn't really ski market. But I'm a solution consultant with PriceLabs, and I work with a lot of our larger property managers in understanding the tool and how to best utilize it. As I said before, I'm also joined on Q&A by Aditya with our team. He's one of the fantastic product specialists on our team. If you've ever reached out to our support staff, there's a chance you've probably gotten a response from him. He's one of the people that really hits those tickets hard. Just a little bit about PriceLabs. If you're here, you probably know about us as a company, so I don't want to go over all of this, but 2014 is when we were founded. We're now pricing about 450,000 listings across the world, completely global company. We are a remote team. So like I said, I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee, got teammates in Chicago. That's where our company was founded, but we're also fully global as well. So if you ever have anything that you need from our support staff, all you got to do is reach out. Somebody's going to be there to help you out. And now we get to the folks that this is actually about. I'm just the moderator guy. So I want to introduce you right now to Miss Meaghan Myers. She is the head of growth at Inhaven. She is a revenue management guru who has recently decided that she's going to hop over to the supplier side, like yourself, or like your boy right here. So Miss Meaghan, if you don't mind, take a few seconds to introduce yourself, give a little bit about your background, and introduce yourself to the audience.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm so happy to be here. So I started my vacation rental career in 2015 in Destin, 30A area, Florida, where I'm originally from, and managed revenue for about 6 years for a company. We had about 700 units called 360 Blue. And then I moved up to Jackson Hole, Wyoming to do something completely different and became the executive director of a holding company here. And our largest company was a vacation rental company with about 270 units, and learned revenue management in a very different destination and completely different market with different seasonality. So then I decided to completely abandon that altogether and move over to the supplier side over at Inhaven, which is a hospitality platform helping you standardize bed, bath, and kitchen items. And I'm just so grateful that you guys are allowing me to be here still when I'm on the dark side. And revenue management is my passion in the industry, so can't wait to chat. And if you hear anything in the background, it's certainly my dogs licking their bowls, so apologies in advance.
I think everybody knows now with the Zoom culture that we've got that you're probably going to hear a dog or a cat or a kid or something like that on this call at some point. So thank you very much for that introduction, Meaghan. We're super happy to have you here. Inhaven is very, very lucky to have you as well. If you have any questions about Inhaven, feel free to Google them. We'll also share our links for LinkedIn, so you can reach out to Miss Meaghan, ask any question that you've got about it. Be on the lookout for her at conferences as well now that she's on the supplier side with us. Next up, we've got Mr. Tim Speicher, who I'm very excited to introduce as well. Recently got to have some conversations with him. He's one of the most talented revenue managers that you're ever going to run across. We've got some really fun stuff today. We're going to do our discussion, but Tim's also got some graphs for us to look at to really get in there and understand what a revenue manager is looking like and what they're thinking as well. So, Tim, thank you for joining us. If you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us where you worked and where you specialize.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I've been a revenue manager for about 15 years now. I actually started off in the live events industry, so pricing tickets and stuff like that. But I was also an Airbnb host, so I had my own little portfolio in Chicago. So I switched over to the property management side. I worked with a company called Oasis that had about 2,500 properties globally. They got investment from Hyatt, so I got professional revenue management training with them. And since then, I've been pricing listings. That's been for the last 10 years or so. I had my own software that I designed and grew for a little bit, but then left that behind to do the pricing myself using PriceLabs. So now I'm an independent revenue manager consulting for a few different companies on 3 different continents. So some of them have some ski units. So I've been digging into ski patterns in Sweden and in Vermont this year. So I'm happy to share with you guys some of the results we have.
Very excited to hear about that too. Like I said, I'm solely focused over here in the United States. So I personally, as a revenue manager, as a geek, am looking forward to hearing about the ski season over in Europe as well. So let's go ahead and kind of get started today. We've got a big day planned out. We're going to talk a little bit about expert insights and some of the lessons that we've learned over time. I could personally talk about a ton of them just from my short experience in the Colorado ski markets and in Vermont as well. But I'd much rather hear from our guests here. So let's start with Tim, and let's just start kind of easy off. What do you think going into ski season are 3 or 4 of the most important things for you to prep going into it?
Prepping. So, well, you've got to have your data together. I kind of assume that everybody just uses market dashboards or neighborhood data if you've got a small portfolio to look at your pricing relative to your comps. But like that's a given. You have to have your comp set established. You have to know where you would price relative to your comps. You have to have your prior year data if that's available to you. And then you have to keep an eye on the market pacing as well. So one of the most important metrics that I use to gauge like whether the booking window is actually open or is time running out, what sort of action should I take, is the market occupancy pacing against last year's market occupancy final. So specifically when I'm opening up ski season, I try to do that as far out in advance as possible. Sometimes you don't have control over that because owners have to agree and like remove their blocks and stuff like that. But if you can start before August, then do and get your calendars open, and then keep an eye on market occupancy trend, specifically for Christmas and New Year's Eve. And you should feel free to be pretty aggressive as you're publishing rates initially. So I would publish higher than I achieved last year on those same nights. You can benchmark that really easily using the pricing graph and neighborhood data. And then I watch the market occupancy for Christmas and New Year's. And once it gets to the point where it's 50% of last year's final, so if last year topped out at 80%, like once we get to 40%, then I start shifting strategy and I start getting less aggressive, looking for ADR, and I start looking for a little bit more occupancy. So as far as the metrics you need, just to recap, that's your own prices, the market prices in your comp set, your historical ADRs, and then the market occupancy pacing for every night over ski season as well.
Those are all really good tips. I love the market occupancy aspect of it and making sure like once you hit that 50%, that's a great way to look at it. From your perspective, Meaghan, when you've been pricing for ski season and even let me take a step back real quick. We're talking about ski season right now. Our data is going to be about ski season, but a lot of these principles can be applied when you have a heavily seasonal market as well. So just like
Mhm.
Tim was saying, in August, you want to kind of be prepped for your ski season. You can think of it kind of similar with beaches too, in my opinion. I don't know if you all agree with that, but we want to be ready by, January, February, if you're going to have a huge peak beach season. There we go. So Meaghan, from your perspective, how would you approach it? Anything different from Tim, or anything else that you would look for when prepping for your ski season?
Yeah, so we really look at forecasting. I should speak in the past tense, but I'm certainly gonna speak in the present tense still. Really with four forecasting methods that we work to combine. So historical based, agree with everything that you said, Tim. Like look at last year, really the past like 1 to 3 years worth of data, clean it up, remove any anomalies, account for portfolio changes. So any attrition that you had or growth that you've had, and then accounting for new competitors too. So using historical data to build your original forecast. And then I think demand data kind of comes in second, and that's looking at real time data. So in the past, I've used Demand IQ within Key Data, huge like Key Data and PriceLabs together fan, and started to build out rules based on booking windows for dynamic pricing within PriceLabs. So segmenting my inventory, and anything that books between 30 and 51 days, I'm going to set it on its specific dynamic pricing rules. I tend to have like 6 booking window groups, and it just depends on how big your inventory is and what your booking windows are. And if you have inventory that's very similar, like if you manage mainly 2 bedroom condos, your booking windows will probably look similar at least. So you won't need to segment your inventory as much compared to if you manage condos, homes, mega homes that range from studios to 7, 8 bedrooms. And then competitive set benchmarking is huge. So monitoring ADR and occupancy of competitors throughout the season, and any specials that they might be running. And then event driven seasonality, which typically it's interesting. Like I used to only think of this in urban markets that had music festivals and like larger events that they focused on. But I consider like we actually call snow in Jackson snow events. And when we have snow events, we price differently. And the next thing I think is I always think of like agility being so important in revenue management. And I might argue, like coming from a beach destination, moving to a ski market, you have to be even more agile just because the weather changes so frequently. So we try to do a lot of proactive owner and guest communication and education ahead of time, and then have marketing plans built out. So if you're going through a dry spell, which we are right now in Jackson, it's snowing in Destin, Florida, but it hasn't snowed here in 2 weeks. We have these marketing plans built out to showcase other things to do in Jackson. And then we also, in the meantime, will communicate with owners proactively and say, hey, just want you to know it's about to not snow for the next 3 weeks. So we are going to be more competitive when it comes to pricing. We are going to be pushing other activities in Jackson. So I think like overall agility in your communication, and of course, flexibility and understanding your owner's willingness to go down to closer to a floor rate in the ski season is important when it is drier.
You make a really good point. It is crazy right now, considering that Destin, Florida, and Panama City Beach and Myrtle Beach and all these places have a little bit of snow. The difference between prepping for, a peak beach summer season versus prepping for a peak ski season are very, very different. Weather is super, super important with that. If you're not seeing the snow coming in, obviously you're not going to have as much ability to generate high revenue and things like that. How do you navigate things like that where, okay, we know that weather isn't going to be helping us? You've already kind of hit on it a little bit, Meaghan, with you have a marketing plan. You're trying to put focus elsewhere. But how do you in real time kind of react to that? And I'll start with you, Meaghan, and then we'll slide over to Tim and get his response as well.
So I think first step is on the marketing side and making sure that you're doing like I always think at the end of the day, we want to be able to go back to homeowners and say we did everything that we possibly could. And that does not just mean lowering rates. like revenue, reservations, and marketing have so much to do with each other. Like this is a holy trinity in vacation rentals. So the first step is on the marketing side. There are so many other things to do in a lot of ski destinations. Like you have Main Street where you can go down and enjoy all the shops. So promoting other activities other than skiing is important. And then dynamic pricing adjustments that get a little bit steeper. And I think it's important to judge that owner sentiment heading into ski season. We try to do a lot of education on the guest side as well. So November and December are more finicky. So if you are coming only at the end of November over Thanksgiving to ski, you might have a different experience, or you will have a different experience than when you come in January. Like January, February, and March, it's pretty guaranteed that there will be snow here. It just, you might not have fresh snow for days at a time. So I don't think, like, we don't ever get to the point where we're flooring rates during ski season because there are these other value propositions that we highlight, but we do have a lot more willingness to discount. And it also depends on competitors as well that we're consistently keeping an eye on. So flexible minimum stays and discounts, I think, are huge during those drier times. And then overall communication. So when it is snowing, we are like blasting on social media. Hey, look at the snow falling. It looks amazing here. We're going to get 2 feet overnight, whatever, whatever. And then if it's not, again, like we're highlighting, hey, it looks beautiful. It's cold here right now, but you can go on a sleigh ride at the elk refuge. So I think it's just kind of balancing the different activities and highlighting when necessary.
Yeah, awesome. And Tim, you probably have a little bit different perspective on this with Meaghan being a little bit more on the property management side. What's your take on how to react, and then also hitting on that communication? Because you can hear by how much I talk, I love communicating. I think it's super important, especially with owners. How much in your position do you actually get to communicate with owners and be ahead of that with that as well?
Yeah, so as far as owner communication, I actually do a fair amount of it. Usually, like if somebody gets angry enough, then then they get a meeting with me.
Yep.
And it's actually my favorite part of the job because which is rare. It's most people's like least favorite part of the job. But if you walk someone through the data and grant them a sense of understanding, then usually they calm down. It's not that they're like, oh my God, I have to have a reservation right now. They want it for sure, but really they want to know that their property, like probably the most valuable asset that they own, is being well managed, and that a lot of the time comes down to pricing. So what I do is I'll often record a video where I just like walk through like a market dashboard for the owners and share that with them. And then for a specific property, I'll go through neighborhood data and show them like this is the comp set that we're tracking. This is how the market occupancy is looking. This is your rate relative to last year and relative to all of these competitions. To all of these competitors. And then I look at year over year revenue pacing, which I generate using the report builder. Because every owner's like, they'll reach out freaking out. They're like, oh my God, last year I was completely booked by this point and I have nothing right now. What are you guys doing? And I go and I look and I'm like, well, actually last year you only had one reservation and it was for New Year's Eve. And like you didn't receive any other reservations until January 15th. So we got plenty of time. And like if you walk them through all of this stuff, it calms them down. Now, when it comes to reacting to snow events and stuff like that, I prepare for it as far out in advance as possible. So if I can get a decent foundation of occupancy on the books, like way far out in advance, then there's like less margin for error as I'm adjusting at the last minute. And so that starts with like opening dates as far as you can and counting on capturing the data that's not coming in for or the demand that's not coming in for the snow. Some number of people like they're going to wait until they know that it's snow and then they're going to choose that weekend to go. Other people, it's like, well, my family's been doing this for 20 years. And so we always go eat at this restaurant and sometimes it's snowy, sometimes it's not. I want those people to stay with me.
Mhm.
And so the way that I approach pricing in those scenarios is I have rates very high on the weekends and stupid low on the weekdays, because I know that like the weekdays only are ever going to get up to like 40% occupancy. So most people are going to be unbooked on those nights. And so if I can get some, even just some short, cheap, like Sunday, Monday bookings or something like that, that's really
Absolutely.
up the overall revenue. But there aren't very many of those. So if you can start way out in advance, it's going to be really helpful. Then as the booking window closes, uh, I always have like the maximum, we talk about reservations, marketing, and revenue. The marketing that I do is through the listings. So in Airbnb, I put on a 10% like blanket discount in a rate plan. That I got the early bird 10% off, like more than 30 days in advance. I have the last minute 10% discount over the last 28 nights. So it's like the whole thing is discounted 10%. And then I add a 10% channel inflation coming out of my PMS to negate that. So I know that, okay, I've got the same rate on my website as I do on Airbnb, except it looks better and gets better page rank from Airbnb. So I'm in the best position that I can possibly be. And then as the booking window closes, I keep tracking current market occupancy versus last year's market occupancy. And I decide how aggressive to be based on that. If it's trending ahead, then I'm a little more aggressive. If it's trending behind, I'm a little bit less aggressive. So hopefully by the end of the booking window, and like when snow is really a factor on who's going to come stay, well, my rates are already in position, and I don't do any like super steep discounting except at a listing level if that particular listing is pacing poorly. Because I'm just like, well, those people are going to come one way or another. And so I'm not gonna drop my rates. I'm just gonna take it in occupancy rather than ADR.
That kind of made my brain start going and brought a question up. So how, with you being, you're in Europe, you're in European countries, you're in the US as well. We don't want to just focus on this like it's US. How are those trends kind of different? Is there anything that you see that's different um, between the individual markets?
Yeah, so I really watch three markets. I'm not presenting data on Montreal today, but I've worked with companies in Montreal for a little while now. And Montreal and Vermont are fairly similar in that there's a nearby big city. So like Mont Tremblant is like the ski area, Mont Blanc outside of Montreal. And
Mhm.
Killington, Vermont is where I have some listings now. And that's like a drive market from Boston, New York, those areas. So it's a little bit more focused on weekends, and it's a little bit more uh sporadic. Like it can be a little bit more last minute. If there's good snow, then people come out from New York or whatever. So I tend to have huge rate variance in between the weekdays and weekends there. Out in Aura, it takes in Sweden, it takes a lot longer to get to that city. It's a long way north of Stockholm. So it's a long drive or a flight to get there. So you end up seeing less weekday to weekend rate variance. People stay a little bit longer. And that's typical of fly to markets or markets that are far away. And like you say, it has a remarkable similarity to Cape Town, South Africa. A beach town destination with a really, really big booking window because most people have to fly there. And because it's the Southern Hemisphere, it actually aligns really well with peak season in European ski destinations.
Meaghan, with you living up in Montana, how do you see booking windows and how do you see length of stay changing? Going kind of off what Tim's saying, it's not like you've got Denver, Colorado necessarily right next to you that you can just hop over to. Do you see longer length of stay? Do you see any difference with the type of people booking where you're at?
Yeah, so the level of just price sensitivity in general has so much to do with whether you're in a fly to or drive to destination. So in Destin, we were completely drive to. Like people come down from Atlanta, a lot of people would drive from Dallas, Nashville, like yeah,
Yep.
Southeast was huge drive to destination. And so we had to be really, really, really conscious of weekend pricing. Like if we were at a Monday and Saturday was the upcoming spring break week, like we knew that we could still achieve like 10% additional occupancy just in those several days. Whereas here in Jackson, we have a local airport and most are flying in there. So we're about 80% fly to. And it's been really interesting because length of stay ranges from about 5 to 6 days, which is great news for us. And then to Tim's point, many people are booking 6 months in advance. Because our airport is really small, similar to an Aspen airport, you're paying $1,000 no matter where you're flying into, at the very least, whether it's summer, which is actually our higher season, strangely enough, because of our access to national parks. And so we have a lot more ability to book before ski season even starts, and our like a goal to achieve occupancy in October, November for ski season in January, February, and March. Like we want to lock in those reservations and keep our 60-day cancellation policy. So whether it's snowing or not, like we're not trying to achieve a lot of last minute occupancy because most people have already booked their airline tickets well in advance.
Awesome. That's really good context for us. The difference between drive to markets and, we can see it. I keep mentioning the Colorado one because, Breckenridge and Vail and all of those places, you can technically get there really quick and you have a lot of last minute bookings. But when we see, some of these other markets, it's much, much further out.
Yeah, we're 8 hours from Denver and 5 from Salt Lake City. I always tell my friends that I'm 5 hours from a Sephora, and
Yep.
that's how you know how remote things are here.
That's really funny. Do you all going into ski season or as ski season's happening, do you use any type of different strategies when it comes to your cancellation policies or anything else outside of just pulling those levers that you have with rate and with minimum length of stay? Kind of what I'm thinking is, do you see any opportunities to go a little bit more restrictive with your cancellation policy because you're trying to get those longer stays? Or do you just say, hey, I'm not worried about this. Let's focus on the revenue or on the rate and the minimum length of stay. And you can take this
Because
first, Becca.
just because we were managing 270 units, like we had to keep the same cancellation policy for throughout the entire year just for sake of time and management of the team. But we found that the 60-day cancellation policy which was actually the same cancellation policy we used in Destin, was helpful. It still allowed enough flexibility for guests 2 months out, but it was also helpful for us to explain to owners when they were onboarding, like, hey, no matter what, we're keeping this strict cancellation policy. It is hard on Airbnb, of course, like Airbnb doesn't like strict cancellation policies, but we've maintained superhost status, and like more than anything, we're booking reservations direct, so it hasn't had a huge impact on us. But I also think, like I read a question about lift tickets, for example. Like when you're in an area like Jackson Hole or Aspen or Telluride, the guests are so affluent anyway that like strict cancellation policies and booking well in advance and lift tickets, like they don't matter as much. Like we don't have a lot of price sensitivity when it comes to guests the way that we did. I mean, they're already spending $1,000 a person on a plane ticket, plus lift tickets, plus rentals. So just, you're having a $25,000 vacation, whether you're staying in a condo, a 2-bedroom condo that costs $5,000 for the week or not. Whereas in Destin, right, like you're getting 15 people in 2 cars and driving down to the beach for the weekend, and it's just a lot cheaper of a trip in general.
Yeah. Um, Tim, what are your thoughts on that, on the cancellation policies? And I do want us to kind of feed into the increase that we've seen in a lot of those ski lift packages and things like that as well, and how that could influence how you maybe adjust a little bit with your rate strategy as well.
Yeah, so in terms of cancellation policy, it's mostly like strict and moderate. I don't think any of the listings I'm part of have a flexible cancellation policy for ski season. That's different from urban areas. Like it's helpful to have a flexible cancellation policy in dense urban areas with a really short booking window because you know that there's a good chance that you can get it rebooked. So yeah, so I use it in the like central Stockholm. I don't use it out in the ski destinations. And in terms of like lift packages and stuff like that, I actually don't know. I don't touch any of that stuff. I only price the nights.
Nice. Focus on what you focus on and what you can control. I like it. All right. Well, we've covered a whole lot right now. We're going to get in here in just a little bit and have Tim kind of look through some data and show us what his thought process was with building his rates and how he's adjusting and all that. But we've got a couple of, in the US, we've got a couple of things that have happened. We've got the wildfires out in Los Angeles. It's not necessarily impacting us with ski season and things like that. But how do you, if something like this is happening in your market, and think of it as more of a generic revenue management type question, what are some of the questions you're asking yourself and asking your team that you may need to do, what you may need to do with your rate strategy in those situations? Tim, do you have anything to add on that?
In terms of like extreme weather situations and stuff like that.
Yeah, let's not necessarily, yeah, extreme weather. Let's not necessarily say like your properties have been affected by the wildfires, but let's say that you see a sudden shift in demand. Like you think it's going to be 75%, something happens and oh Lord, now you're looking at 25% occupancy for
So
the week.
people are displaced and rebooking with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, well, for the most part, they'd be booking long term, so I have long-term discounts in place. But I just morally, I couldn't raise the rate in that situation. And I think that if somebody asked me for a special quote, I'd give them a discount in that situation. It's just like, I couldn't feel good about taking that money, knowing what cost someone to go there. What I would recommend is if you're a property manager, see if you can make, especially if you accept primarily midterm stays, make relationships with local insurance companies because a lot of the time they have to like do the placement and they'll actually do the transaction and book out for their guests. It's really preferable for them, especially if there's a family, because they can book a home that's more comfortable for the family and it's cheaper than getting a couple of different hotel rooms. So you can be proactive and capture revenue through the insurance company. But if you feel like raising rates because people are displaced nearby, then I would recommend like resisting that impulse.
Yeah, I agree on that one. And I probably should have worded that question a little bit better, I think. But I appreciate the insight on that, Tim. And I agree with you. And the one thing that I really took away from your response too is that communication. It's important, having that line of communication with your guest, with your owners and operators is super important as a revenue manager. Meaghan, I would give you an opportunity, but I feel like that question was kind of, like a throwaway type of a thing. So how would you respond if you had something like, what happened in Asheville? Maybe you're expecting a bunch of people to come in and it just doesn't happen. How are you going about having that communication with your owners, with, potential stakeholders in the company and preparing them for those instances where you're not going to hit your goal? Um,
Mhm.
how would you approach that kind of a conversation?
Well, I think it's interesting. Like the first question that you asked, it is something that we face a lot in revenue management and in vacation rentals and in general. Like when there is a disaster elsewhere and there are people that are displaced in your area, or if there is a disaster near you that you haven't been affected by, but guests don't know that, you have this responsibility and to let people know like, hey, everything's okay here, but you still have to maintain this intense level of sensitivity and empathy. And that's really hard. Like specifically when I was in Destin and we had Hurricane Michael hit Panama City and like completely decimated Panama City. It was so horrible, but all of our properties remained untouched. And it was difficult because you have owners calling you with expectations like, hey, everything's fine at my property. And like, I expect to reserve. Like, owners don't have the same empathy because they have a mortgage to pay a lot of the time, right? Where you're like, hey,
Yep.
half of our team doesn't have anywhere to live anymore because they were driving there. And also, like, we are housing displaced individuals, but at the same time, we have a responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility to pay our team because we need to be making sure that we're getting reservations in. And so I think that we relied heavily on this like uber sensitive marketing strategy to let people know that while we were volunteering every single day to rebuild Panama City to the best of our ability, our homes were available in the case that people still wanted to make a beach vacation. And it was our way of remaining sensitive, still helping and build back the community while also like committing to the responsibility that we have to our homeowners, which is to book their properties to the best of our ability. So I don't think it was a bad question. Like, I do think that these are things that come up frequently. And I'm sure that California is facing something similarly in Northern California, right? Where people are afraid, but you still have homeowners that are calling you. And it's a really tricky situation. So I'm curious to see like how everybody else handles it. I mean, you also have the opportunity to say to your owners, like, you're an asshole, so you can wait a little while. But that's also hard, right? Because we really focus on the 80-20 rule. 80% of our income comes from the top 20% of our homeowners. And we're always doing our best to make sure that that top 20% is as happy as possible. Like, if we lose two of those homeowners, that could be equivalent to 4 jobs in the company. And so letting our team know that coddling and taking care of those homeowners is the most important thing, and making sure that they're hitting their revenue goals. But I think it goes back to communication in general. Like, we send a monthly newsletter to homeowners that overall like just speaks to their performance in the area. And then annually, Outpost, my previous company, would send a marketing report that went to all realtors and all homeowners and all prospective homeowners that gave just a full overview of reservations, occupancy, demand in our area over the past year and compared to similar ski destinations as well. I think so much of it is education. So to homeowners, it could be, hey, we were expecting X and now we're expecting Y. Here's what happened. Here's the context and here's what we're doing about it. I think the most important thing, in addition to context, is always providing a solution to your homeowners. Like, I have found, and I've done some consulting over the past couple of years as well, that companies that focus on monthly goals versus annual goals for their homeowners end up in a host of trouble. Because if you're communicating to your homeowners, like, here's what you can expect every single month in terms of revenue, you just have those phone calls coming. Like, you need to make sure, I think, that you're communicating goals on an annual basis, or at my recommendation would be a range. Like, hey, we expect you to do between 80 and 100 this year. And here's the situation where you would do 80,000, and here's what it would look like if you did 100,000. And then communicating throughout the year why you may or may not be on target, and then what you're doing to solve the problem. Um, you could also have a Tim who loves communicating with homeowners as well. And so listen, Tim, you're the only person I've ever heard in my 10 years say that. So I think that's an incredible marketing pitch for yourself.
Agreed. Agreed on that. I felt it a little bit. I enjoyed having those conversations, but I think I was a little bit more nefarious with it. Like, hey, I want to show this person that they don't know what they're talking about, which was a terrible mindset to have and probably why I'm no longer doing it. But hey, you know how that goes. All right, so now we're going to switch it up a little bit. It's time for Tim. So we're going to switch over here and I'm going to let him kind of take the lead with this and describe what we're going to be looking at and show exactly what it is that he's put into his pricing strategy. So Tim, let's take the floor and take as much time as you need. We technically have 20 minutes left, so do whatever you need. We can always extend it.
Yeah, should be plenty of time. Also, I want to invite anybody to ask questions about these graphs. So if I zip forward to a new graph and you've got a question about a past one, just stop me and I'll answer your question. So this is the initial pricing I put on the calendar for Aura Sweden. It's the northern Sweden ski area that I've been working with. So this is the company is Guessed It. They are absolutely killing it in Sweden right now. They are doing awesome. The team is wonderful. And we're having a record ski year by a long shot. So these are the initial rates I published when we opened our calendars in late August, early September. The properties here are close to, many of them are very close to ski in, ski out. They also tend to be small, so lots of studios and one beds, whereas most of the rest of the market is a lot larger. So I think we have like 150 studios or something like that. And in the entire rest of the market, there's only 9 other studios. So like we have
Wow.
like that like affordable cohort like on lock. So that's why you see some of the rates are fairly low here. But also, if you look at like how I approached Christmas and New Year's, and then this is called Sporting Week out here at the end of February. It's a big week for a lot of ski seasons. I was really high, you know, almost always above the 75th percentile, and sometimes getting close to the 90th percentile. And that's not comparing against one beds, that's comparing against 1 through 6 bedrooms in the market. So, you know, some of them get really, really expensive out here on like some of these nights. But you know, those are in general really, really large homes, and some of our homes as well. So in terms of lengths of stay, I had a booking window dependent length of stay rule that began with a 5-night minimum and then went down to 3 and 2. I think that 3 kicked in at 90 days and 2 kicked in at 60 days or something like that. Maybe 3 kicked in at 120 days. But regardless, the initial minimum stay was 5. In the past, the company had done a lot of 7-night minimums. You know, there's a long tradition of people coming and booking for a full week and staying like over that weekend skiing. So the initial thing that I wanted to try to do was capture higher ADRs through a shorter minimum length of stay to start out. So that's why I went out with 5 and then shifted down. The thing that I really love about that is you get to access more demand and increase your booking volume without lowering your rate. You can just keep the rates high, shorten the minimum length of stay, and new reservations come in like magic. It's great. So that's where this is where rates began. Oh, sorry. Lastly, I assumed everybody understands this graph because it's like so core to PriceLabs communication, but this is us against the rest of the market, the 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentiles right there. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, and so this is where we were as of Monday. I believe I pulled this. So you can see us here in the middle of January. So if we're looking at current year occupancy versus prior year occupancy, and we're looking from December 1 on, you can see occupancy jumping up on the weekends, coming down on the weekdays, a little bit lower year over year for Christmas. That was mostly due to Christmas being on a Wednesday and throwing the balance off. Then it's like a little bit lower here before New Year's. There's New Year's, and we're a little bit higher over the first part of January. And you're like, okay, so your occupancy is down year over year. And indeed it is. Our occupancy is down year over year. That is because our average length of stay indeed did drop as we had that shorter minimum. The average length of stay is about 5 this year, where last year it was 6. However, if I'm going to come back to this slide in a second, but let's go to the next slide. The rates that we achieved were so much higher year over year that our RevPAR is also a lot higher year over year. In fact, by the time we hit January 5th, we had already eclipsed the prior year's final revenue for February on the same listing. So like we had like about 5% listing growth year over year, and we had about 35% revenue growth. Now, part of that was because some of these listings were launched in December 1st of last year. So they were a little bit underpriced as they were getting going, but still it was a I was shocked at some of the rates that we achieved by initially publishing very, very high rates with relative to the market short lengths of stay. Let's go back to the previous slide real quick. So definitely track all of this stuff. This is very important. There's also market data that you should be looking at, but I didn't drop that in here. I want to point out this. This is another thing that I really track every week. So this is your weekly pickup. And this lets you know how much occupancy you picked up on that day over the past 7 nights. And so what I do is just visually, I always look, I'm like, okay, if we're picking up 20% every week for 5 weeks, that gets us to 100% over that 5-week booking window. This area has a lot larger booking window. So if we do about 10% per week for 10 weeks, then we'll fill up as well. And so I kind of use that as a gauge for how healthy the portfolio is, like as it's pacing week to week. If 1 week everything jumps way up, then I know I'm probably underpriced. If 1 week it's like down in the bottom, then I know like maybe there was a sync connection with booking.com or something like that. Anyway, I'm going to talk about Killington in a second. Does anybody have questions on Aura?
It doesn't look like we have anything specific to what we have. We do have a couple of good questions that we'll hit up, but I don't think we have anything specific to what you're presenting right now.
Okay, great. So let's jump into Killington. Okay, perfect. So here's my pricing. This is a company called Getaway Vacations in Killington. They're also doing great. They're having a record year as well. And this is how I approached their initial pricing in September when we opened up their calendars. So a few things here. Number one, these listings are a little bit larger than I have in Sweden. Some of them are really nice, but a lot of them are like larger budget homes. So I knew that for most of them, I wasn't going to be above the 90th percentile, and I needed to be pretty competitive. So on the weekends, that's Thanksgiving, Christmas and New Year's here. Here's MLK. Here's like the first President's Weekend. Pretty aggressive on all of those, getting above the 50th percentile for the most part. And then on all of the weekdays, even with the initial rates that I published, I was down like near the listing minimums, well below the 25th percentile in the market, because I know that those nights are typically empty. So even if I can rent it out for like a profit of $1, then I'm going to do it because like that's just extra revenue that the homeowner is getting. So there's the initial rates. So let's see where this one shook out. So, I wanted to show, gotcha. So one other thing, I was trying to decide, okay, how long do I stay aggressive on my length of stay? And I had 3-night minimum stays all through those peak times in ski season, because I know that if there's still time in the booking window in the owner's mind, which typically that's like before Thanksgiving, if there's still time in the booking window and they receive a reservation that's shorter than 3 nights, they freak out and they get all upset about it. So even though I knew that I could get a little bit more demand by having just a 2-night stay live, I waited until the last possible moment to do that. And so if you're like, okay, well, how do you tell what the last possible moment is? If you look here, you can see some dotted lines that shows the new bookings pickup for the same portfolio over the last several years. And I could see that every year right here at the start of December is when people started booking. It's like Thanksgiving would end, you get to that first week of December, and people just start booking. So I was tracking. So first of all, we did open up the booking window a little bit earlier. You can see this is last year. It started confirming reservations earlier than the other years did. That was super helpful for my initial rates that I had on the calendar that were very high. And that's why the majority of owners here received higher ADRs over New Year's than they did in years past. But so I held out until this date to switch my length of stay minimum to 2, because I was like, okay, I know that week is when typically people really start purchasing stays. That's like when the lifts open and stuff like that. So when that happens, I need to be in the absolute perfect position to receive reservations. So that's when I switched on the 2-night minimum for all of those nights. And bang, we had this huge surge in new bookings that has continued into the new year. So it's like, it was kind of crazy, like night and day, like how this changed. So we already had all of the OTA promotions in place. We already had a whole bunch of 3-night and longer stays on the books. And then we turned that on to like really ramp demand up to the like maximum amount right when people typically start booking. So, that's why we're at like an all-time pace. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's the pricing as of earlier this week. You can see I've gotten aggressively low for this coming weekend. We're now like around the 25th percentile in general. And I'm generally below the 50th percentile for a lot of these other weekends, unchanged down here near the minimum for the weekdays. But you can see in terms of our occupancy, we just absolutely are killing it in early January because people are booking way more midweek nights. Like the length of stay is very similar. It's a funny thing about your minimum length of stay. It doesn't necessarily correlate to the average length of stay you actually achieve, because that's more determined by how many people or the types of stays that people purchase. So don't worry that like if you set your minimum to 2, you're only going to get 2-night stays. We got a whole big mix. The average came down a tiny bit, but not very much. And it was mostly people booking cheap short stays in the middle of the week when most of the other homes are unbooked. So that type of occupancy improvement led to a really big RevPAR improvement over that period. And if you look at occupancy here, you can see like we were just a little bit higher on New Year's Eve. This is MLK this year, and this was MLK last year. So you can see like we outperformed on MLK, which, the owners always care about that. But the biggest improvement we've had so far this year is in all of these like midweek nights getting booked. So let's jump to the next slide. All right. And so you can see the ADR is actually lower. It's lower kind of by a lot. And that's because like the ADR ignores those unbooked nights. It doesn't care. And so it's like your ADR will look pristine if you only ever book a Friday and Saturday, but your revenue is not going to be optimized. So what you want to do is like, yes, get those high value weekends at like the highest rate that you can, but like don't skimp on those like midweek stays either. And I know that the thought of like getting a Sunday Monday booking or like a Monday Tuesday booking at a really low ADR, like that freaks some people out because they say like, well, it's going to take more to heat the house than we're going to bring in on those nights. Yes, you do get some of those. Make sure your minimums are in a place where they can be additive to your bottom line. But what you're more likely going to get is somebody who's checking in on a Friday and staying through Monday night and checking out on a Tuesday. So you pick up that like Sunday, Monday, low value night, you couple it with the high value night, and all of a sudden the total ADR for the stay is lower, but the total revenue is way higher. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you some examples of this. So this is what it looks like when that strategy generally works out. So you can see here we've got a reservation with a higher stay. You can see here we've got a year-over-year reservation that's at a lower ADR. That's a mistake. And that was the first reservation that we received for that night on the season. And I saw that it was lower than the prior year. And I was like, oh, I got to go through and like revamp all of these rates. So the market got one on me, but that was it. Then, you know, here we're booked with some weekends on a night that went unbooked last year. Here we've got a nice like 4-night stay that couples midweek nights along with this weekend. Here we've got all weeknights booked, but at a higher ADR than the previous year. Here we've got a 3-night stay on a weekend. Here's a really low ADR, but I don't care because it's all weeknights. And let's go to the next one. This one's even more extreme. So sometimes you do have like a little bit shorter, or you do have a lower ADR like this. It's like, okay, well, this is the blend of this really low weekday ADR and the really high weekend ADR. And this revenue earned more than this reservation earned more than the same reservation on that same weekend a year ago because it had 2 more nights attached to it. And so if you look at every one of these reservations, like almost down to the night, they're better than the previous year. Yeah, you get every now and then you get like a Wednesday, Thursday booking like that. That's really cheap. But like a lot of the time you're going to get these, or you're going to get these that are at like much higher ADRs because it's coupling the low value weekday with the high value weekend. Yeah. So that's what it looks like at a listing level. Now I'm ready for questions if anybody has questions on these.
I was going to say that was a lot of fun to watch you go through, Tim. As a revenue management geek, I was just kind of sitting there like, yeah, this is awesome. We do have a couple of questions, a couple of them specific to you, Tim. So let's start with one that just came in from Michaela. She said, "Why did you pick a comp set that includes studio to 6 bedrooms if your inventory is studio to 2 bedrooms?"
So I have detailed cohorts like broken down that I also track. That's not the only thing that I tracked. I showed that because it showed the least granular data to keep things relatively anonymous for that property manager. But when I'm actually going through each week, I have it broken down by building and by bedroom count. And then within those cohorts, which I think the smallest has like 4 listings in it and the largest has like 40. I look at those same metrics for every single cohort. And then I also track down to the listing level within the cohort using the report builder and the multi-calendar, because I then can keep track on the last booked date and the pickup over the last 7 and the last 21 for every single listing. So if it's been a long time since something's gotten a booking, the calendar's open, the prices look good, I can really dig in and find out like, okay, have I done something? Was I too aggressive? Or do I need to reach out to the operations team to find out if everything's okay with the listing and the property?
Awesome. Meaghan, I apologize that we've had you quiet for just a little bit. Thank you for still being awake with us. I've got a question from Elite Property in London. They are asking what customizations do you recommend during a low season?
So top customization I recommend is adjusting your minimum length of stay and shortening that. So going down to 1 or 2 nights if you're able, and tiered pricing for longer stays. So for example, 15% off for stays longer than 5 nights, or 20% off for stays longer than 7 nights. And you can build all those customizations into PriceLabs, are the top 2 that I've used in the past.
Awesome. Got a question from Sean, and I think this one probably needs a little bit more context to it, but you all answer it however you like, and if both of you could answer, that'd be great. Do you have an occupancy number that you shoot for? Let's narrow it down and say during peak season. I think the fun answer is we all want 100% at the highest ADR possible.
So ski season, like prime ski season for us is January through March, and we typically shoot for 72 to like 80% occupancy. And if you add in the lower ski season, which is November and December when the mountain opens, it lowers it down a little bit to like 55 to 67-ish percent. And that's what we typically shoot for, knowing that it's really just skewed because of the holidays.
How about you, Tim? What do you have an occupancy number you're striving for in peak season?
Yeah, it's pretty similar for large homes. 55% is like perfect because that means there's a 4-night booking every weekend in the month. So if like just as an aside, you shouldn't feel nervous about putting in a huge length of stay discount for a 30-night stay, because even if you put in a 45% discount, then that nets out to being 55% of the RevPAR, which is identical to getting a 4-night stay every weekend. So for a larger home, 55% is really good. For a smaller home, I'd want to be like 90 for a studio that accepts 1-night stays and is like ski in, ski out, because you might miss like a couple of nights here or there and not have a same day turn. But yeah, I'd probably say 90 for a studio.
Thank you all for that. Next question I've got is from Randy. He says he's curious how much Sunday through Wednesday stays are discounted versus weekends. I think this kind of goes back to one of the earlier points you were making, Tim, about being more flexible and having those really high rates on weekdays or on weekends and then coming down a little bit on weekdays. So what's your strategy, Tim, when it comes to targeting those weekdays? And then once Tim's done, Meaghan, if you'll kind of expand on if you have a strategy as well that you like to deploy.
So let's go back a slide or two, because it's like 3 or 4x. Weekends are higher than weekdays. So like a 50 to 75% discount. Yeah. So I'm like, go forward one. So for this listing, the peak weekends are up around 1,200 and the weekdays around those are around 300. So I think this one goes 300 to 1,200 or so. Some of the less peak weekends are a little bit lower, but yeah, so 3 to 4x.
Awesome. How do you feel about Meaghan? Is that kind of the way that you would look at it as well, kind of that 3 to 4x for weekends versus your less valuable weekdays?
Yeah, so fly to, I would say like 10 to 15% lower on the weekdays just because you have those longer stays. Of course, this depends on time of year. And then drive to destinations, I typically say between like 20 and 25% lower.
Thank you so much for saying it that way too. It's a nice reminder. Segmentation is super important when it comes to revenue management. And the way you look at this, you can't just apply one thing here, one thing there. You really have to segment in it and look at things very differently. Got another one from Randy. He's asking if managers are offering discounted NR rates. Not 100% sure what NR is. Non-refundable. Non-refundable. There we go.
Yep.
Awesome. So Randy, that's a very simple explanation. Yep, they're discounting it pretty heavily. Next one we've got is from Rick, and he specifically asked for Tim, but Meaghan, I'd like your opinion on this as well. So if you'll take it first for me. How do you use early bird and those last minute discounts, or how did you use them, Meaghan? And then once Meaghan finishes up, Tim, if you'll kind of go with what you're doing currently with them.
So we didn't do any early bird discounting. Like most of our inventory is high end, like toward the luxury end. So we actually were getting like pretty top tier prices for early reservations, like anywhere from 7 to 15% higher than what they booked last year. And we would use historical data to originally set prices. And then last minute discounts are all built into the dynamic pricing algorithm. So it was falling significantly behind the booking window and we were concerned, we would offer like up to 15% off, but we kept it pretty strong at about 15%. And to Tim's point, like if somebody wanted to stay for 20 nights, then we'd go upwards of 25% off, but we didn't get a lot of long-term stays in Jackson.
Awesome. How about for you, Tim?
Yeah, so there's I've never seen a bigger market response than when I turn on all of the promotions possible. So this is true for if you're in an Airbnb market or if you're in a booking.com market. I just always set a 10% early bird that begins 1 month out and goes for the rest of time. And then I do a 10% last minute that covers the last 30 days of the booking window, or 28 on Airbnb. In urban areas in low seasons, I will increase that to 20% over the last 2 weeks, because then you maximize your exposure through emails. Then I don't drop the rate manually or I don't build in an additional discount to what PriceLabs puts. I use like the PriceLabs recommended end of booking window rate, because that way I know, all right, my promotions are at their maximum, so I have the most visibility possible on the OTAs. I know that I'm not deliberately too low, because PriceLabs has priced me along with the market. So if I'm still not getting pickup, I feel confident in making a calendar-based adjustment to get more competitive on a given night. And so that lets me know, like, all right, I'm in the best possible position, so I can make a small change and expect a result. Sometimes, and this is how I used to use PriceLabs years ago, excuse me, I would have my prices too high and then freak out over the last 3 weeks and like drop rates 40% and get reservations that way. It's not the healthiest way to do it. And so I know that I can avoid that approach with this like much more incremental approach. And every time I begin helping a property manager, we make that switch. We engage all of the rate plans on the OTAs. We change their end of booking window overrides to be less aggressive. Every single time I've done that, the next week they set a new bookings record. And so then
That's awesome.
I use all of that data that's coming in, and this works better for large portfolios. Because like if you have a single listing and you do it and you're too low, then you book up and you're screwed. But then I raise the rate until the pace evens out. So at that point, I'm publishing a little bit higher rates than I was originally, effectively. They look really discounted. So they've got strike through, they've got like high page rank. And with the strike through pricing, you get that price anchoring. The guest sees, oh, this was initially published at $400 a night, and here it is at $320. Incredible. What a deal. But it's like every single night on the calendar has that type of incentive. So I strongly recommend people use those. I recommend that you negate any of those blanket discounts. Like if you're doing a blanket 10% far out and a blanket 10% last minute, then do a 10% inflation to that channel through your PMS. So that way your rates are all the same. Once you know that they're all the same and maximally promoted on the OTAs, you can make small changes within PriceLabs and see the effects on all of your OTAs.
Tim, that was awesome. Guys, thank you all so much for joining me today. We've gone over a little bit in time, but hey, when you have fun conversations like this, that tends to happen. So Tim and Meaghan, thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. Meaghan, congratulations on your new role at Inhaven. You're going to be an absolute rock star there. Tim, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to having this conversation again. Everybody, thank you for joining today, and we'll see you around with RevLabs by PriceLabs. Bye-bye.
Thanks, PriceLabs. Bye.
Bye-bye.